Hi, welcome to the Learning House. I'm Corey Dean, and today I'm meeting with Dr. J. Wile. Dr. J, it's such a privilege to meet with you. I know that I've shared with you at various times how you've impacted our family providing science curriculum over the years, and how my kids have responded and loved science and even gone into science at the university level. So it's been such a pleasure to have you influence and help to teach and bring truth and knowledge to my kids through science learning. And we're going to chat today about Berean Builders, about some of these resources that you provide. I'm going to flip back and forth if you want to refer to some of your books, and we can open some up and take a look at them. But before we do that, thanks for joining me. And
It's great to be here.
Thank you. And I'd love for you to tell me why Berean Builders? What inspired you to start this company, this series of books?
Well, I didn't actually start the company. I'm writing the books. The company is run by somebody else. But we named it based on the idea that we want to build Bereans. The Bereans are the folks in Acts 17 that Paul said were more noble than many Christians because they not only heard the word, but then they checked the scriptures to see if it was correct. That's the kind of student we want to build. We want people who will check the facts to make sure what they're being told is true. And so we're doing that through science. There are many, many ways you can do that, but for us, we're doing it through specifically science.
Very neat. I love that we focus on the critical thinking skills, especially with our sciences. So for somebody who's not familiar with the resources that you provide, tell me what resources you have.
Well, we have a full line of K through 12 science curriculum and the elementary K through 6, and they can actually go to K through 7 depending on your students. Yeah, that's the elementary there. They're fundamentally different from the other programs or the other curriculum we have. So our elementary curriculum is based on chronology. The book you're seeing there, Science in the Beginning, does the 6 days of creation, the 6 creative days of creation, and you learn a little bit about the things that were created. You learn a little bit about the science behind the things that were created. And the idea there is it gives you just a general overview of science. Then in the next book, Science in the Ancient World, that one, we start with science as it was done by humans. And we teach science as it was learned. So Science in the Ancient World covers from the ancient Greeks, specifically the Ionian Greeks. They're the ones who actually came up with doing observation and so forth, all the way through Leonardo da Vinci. And that just gives you whatever was discussed and learned about in that time period. And then the next book, Science and the Scientific Revolution, then gives the next chapter. That's 200 years after. So it's the next 200 years. You do Copernicus and Vesalius, who most historians would say ushered in the scientific revolution. And you end with Newton, who was a pivotal figure in science. And then there's Science in the Age of Reason. That's fun for Americans because that covers a little bit about what went on during the Revolutionary War and the independence time. So you get to learn about Ben Franklin. You also get to learn about the first submarine that was used in battle. It was a spectacular failure. But it ended up being presaging the submarines we have today. And then we have Science in the Industrial Age, which is the last of the elementary books. And that covers just the 1800s to the early 1800s to the 1900s. Actually, it finishes with World War I. And so that gives you sort of the development of science up until the 20th century. And the idea is in elementary school, they're doing lots of hands-on activities. Every time you do science in these books, you're doing something with your hands, which allows it to be used by very, very young students. Also, these books are multi-grade. So all of your K through 6 or K through 7 students do the same book, the same lesson. However, at the end of every lesson, there are 3 levels of review, and that's how you decide what your student does in terms of age level. So you do the age level not by the material, but actually by the end of the lesson. which would be on the next page.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
So yeah,
lessons
there you go. So the lesson review, and that.
Oldest students.
Yeah, so youngest students are before they can really write or draw. Older students are when they're starting to be able to form sentences and write sentences and draw and so forth. And then oldest students, typically 5th and 6th grade, when they're getting to the point where they can really communicate well and draw well and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea is this is a sort of this is a family activity up K through 6 or K through 7. And the order I gave them in, I just gave them in, is the chronological order, but you don't have to do it that way. If you're doing a history spine, so if you're doing some program where history is guiding everything else or pretty much everything else you're doing, then you can just choose whichever book or whichever course follows your time period. And depending on the spine you use, Berean Builders probably has a guide for you. So BereanBuilders.com/history will have a list of all of the major homeschool spines like Mystery of History and Biblioplan and Story of the World. And it'll tell you where really our books correspond to their books. And that can give you
really good to know.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of families who resonate with a classical or a Charlotte Mason style of learning that would gravitate to that history spine style of learning. And I appreciate that you have this value for critical thinking, for science, and for history, and integrating all of that learning together.
And we've actually heard from parents who say that their child wasn't all that interested in science, but was interested in history, and this was kind of the hook to get them in.
And I love having this hook of having an activity or an experiment with each lesson. If you can't read this is the Diet Coke and Mentos fountain. Every child has to do that sometime in their childhood, right? You're like, have you lived until you've exploded Coke and Mentos?
That's right. And what's interesting about that is when that first became an internet thing, a couple of papers were written in the scientific literature because the explanation for it wasn't clear at first.
That's right.
And so it took a few rounds of arguing in the scientific literature for us to come up with what's the real explanation for it.
I would like you to know that at camp one year, my husband and his well-rounded friends took the time to put the experiment together for a friend. Unbeknownst to that friend, we've all had to have that chance. My kids enjoyed that. That was kind of fun. So coming back to hands-on critical thinking, science, history, this just it pulls so much good stuff together, and we get so much good feedback from families. But is there a particular curriculum style that you're looking to teach towards? Are you aiming this towards the Charlotte Mason crowd or the classical crowd or the hands-on crowd, or who did you write this in mind?
I really wrote it honestly with me as a little kid in mind.
Good. Okay. So now we have an insight into the little Dr. J. Okay.
I was the little kid who mixed chemicals, not knowing what would happen and things like that. So, but I would say if I had to classify it, it's kinesthetic because every lesson is a hands-on activity. And I think that makes it valuable even for very young students. So students who can't even read can enjoy the experiment. What I generally tell parents is when your oldest one is in 1st or 2nd grade, that's when you start. And then you just bring all the other ages along. And as you progress through the books and through the years, the only thing that changes is what level review your student's doing. So I would call it kinesthetic, but it resonates with classical because it's a historical approach. And, a lot of what classical is to show you how academics and thinking have changed with the culture. That's one big point of classical education. You read these intellectuals from the BC times all the way up to the 1800s, and you see how culture has affected thinking. And so in this program, you see how culture has affected science. And the one thing I wanted to bring out, because all the way up to university level, all of my students, including even some of my master's students, have this idea that somehow science and religion are separate. But if you study science historically, like you do here, you will see that science wouldn't exist as it does today without the Christian church. The Christian church was absolutely fundamental in shaping science. And we'd have something we call science, but it wouldn't look anything like what we have now. That's the church's hand.
That's very neat. Yes, I very much appreciate that. And the idea that critical thinking is strongly intertwined with our faith as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
and the medieval church had understood that really well, because, for example, just to be a priest in the medieval church, you had to study and demonstrate at least competence with Aristotle's logic. And Aristotle was a pagan, so they weren't learning Aristotle in order to learn about Christianity. They were learning Aristotle to learn how to properly think so that they could think critically about their faith.
Very good. Wow, that's neat. I didn't know that. That's really neat. Okay, coming back to who these resources are written for, is there a particular audience? Like, is this for a Christian crowd? Is this for any crowd? This is clearly Christian materials that's like us approaching science with a Christian worldview. But is this going to work for a family who does not want religious materials?
It will early on. Well, it will and it won't. It depends on how open-minded they are. I always get upset with a lot of homeschooling curricula that are overtly Christian for no reason. So they put in Bible verses that have no bearing on the discussion. They talk about Christians who aren't related to what they're doing at all.
Right.
And I have no patience for that, because that's just silly.
I remember Ruth Beechek wrote once years ago and said that initially homeschooled materials, what we would do is we'd take public school materials and go down a grade and say, so this grade 6 material, it's now grade 5 material. We like sprinkle in some Bible verses and call it Christian homeschool material. And I think we've come a long way from that time, but there is still that stuff there. Yeah.
So in these books, especially in the elementary books, I concentrate on what the scientists themselves believed back then. So early on, of course, I mean, not in the ancient Greeks, but early from birth of Christ forward, we're talking about Christians, and it was mostly Christians doing science. There are very, very few non-Christians doing science once that starts happening. And so you talk about their ideas, but then when especially in the age of reason, when either deists who are trying to at least get rid of the Bible in science, or actually atheists start doing their work, I talk about their views too. Now, if they relate to the science, I talk about why I think they're wrong. So there are geologists, for example, in the Age of Reason, William Hutton's probably the most classic example, that first started bringing in along millions and millions of years to explain certain rock formations. And I talk about why he thought that. And then, of course, I talk about why I think he's wrong. And that may be where, I mean, the parts where I'm talking about the scientists who are Christians and their beliefs, that may be annoying to non-Christians, and where I argue against the sort of reigning doctrine of the day, that might be annoying. I do know non-Christians who use the curriculum,
absolutely,
but I think it is more comfortable. And I was asked by Chemical and Engineering News, which is the trade publication for chemists and chemical engineers. They interviewed me about my chemistry course for homeschoolers, and they asked me specifically, why do you do this religion stuff? Why don't you just teach the chemistry? And to me, I said, because there's no way I could teach the chemistry without it. You can't teach a course on law without referencing the source of law, the Constitution, in the U.S. is what I'm talking about. And you can't talk about science without referring to
we got a Constitution too.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. I just don't know anything about it. I'm a good American. I don't know anything about any other country.
Okay. Okay.
So anyway, I just write it naturally that way. And it does tend to resonate more with a Christian audience, but I don't make it, like I said, I have no patience for people just throwing in Bible verses that have no reference or have no relevance, or even prominent Christians who have no relevance.
Right. And that's so important too, that our kids don't get a message from us to be critical in thinking about what scientists and professors say, without also being critical about what other Christians and pastors and Christian leaders say, because we do need to think through these things critically and bring it back to the Word. And so good. So good. Now you have mentioned that this series here is most suited for K to 6, grade 1 to 6, grade 1 to 7-ish. But we're not attaching a specific grade. You know, some of our families want to get a grade 6 book, so they want to grade a grade 3.
Yeah, we don't do that.
That's not going to be what we have here. But we can do this with a variety of ages. What would you say are my limits? Knowing that I played very much that game when my kids were little. As soon as my oldest was about 6 years old, we were reading through these science books together, knowing that the 2-year-old would peel off and start coloring on the dog or something. And but that we would keep the attention of who was available, and we would go through the activities, and eventually that younger one would cycle into doing the younger, middle, older type activities as we were learning. So sort of as young as they're able to pay attention and participate, how old is too old for a student to get into this, this series of 5 books?
Well, part of it depends on what the student and your goal for the students are, because in the end, if you're talking about someone who's university bound or college bound or something like that, then you need to get out of these books by grade 7 at the latest. You could go through grade 7 if you want, but that would be the limit. But you know, we're homeschooling to meet the needs of our kids, and as a university professor, I think there are far too many people in university right now. I think college and university is not the right choice for most people. So you know, if they're not university bound, I think it can go to when they stop being, you know, challenged or learning. I've always said the sweet spot of education is where a student is not overwhelmed, but still strongly challenged. If you're in that sweet spot, go to grade 12 if they're not, you know, college or university bound. But college or university, your last year would have to be grade 7, because at that point you've got to transition into older materials. One way you kind of find out, I think you can best find out, is when the student's in grade 5th or 6th grade, there are tests in the little soft cover books. Give the students some of the tests, in that book there, and you're free to photocopy them or scan them and print them right out of the book. Give the student some of those tests and see how they do. And if the student does well on the test, that means they've got the study skills to move on. If not, then your 6th grade year and maybe your 7th grade year should be spent less on the science and more on developing the study skills.
Right.
Yeah, because if you're college or university bound, because that's where you're going. So those are answers to the reviews. But if you go back a little while,
these are helps and hints here, and then back further we have our test.
There, so a little bit far. There's a test, for example.
There.
And that's a typical, you know, some multiple choice, some fill in the blank, all that kind of stuff. And then of course you got answers at the end there too. They're your answers. But so the whole point of
tests are for the youngest bunch.
No, the oldest.
For your 5th and 6th graders.
Yeah. And the only reason you'd give them isn't to, I don't think the reviews are a good evaluation because they're notebooking and everything. The only reason you give these is to see if your student's ready to move on.
Yeah, very good. Okay, and you talked about notebooking, so let's address the notebooks that are available. So first of all, we want families to know that, I'm going to go back to this little camera, that you are providing a link in this book to notebooking resources.
Yeah, I don't think it's actually there. It's the main Berean Builders website. So the main Berean Builders website, if you click on product resources there.
So not here on the Berean Builders website. There is a link to a notebook that looks like, and I've not got the matched notebook with it here, but something like this gotta be smart here.
Right.
It's something that looks like this, and but that we can print ourselves. So moms and dads don't have to use this. And if they do use it, they don't have to purchase it separately. They can print what they need, correct?
Right. So you can buy that because it's already printed and bound, and that way you don't have to do it. But the content is free on the website, so you can get it and print it out and put it together yourself.
That are appropriate to that level or to that book. So you've got an older and an oldest book available. The parents can print themselves or that can be purchased already printed. And but there's not a younger notebook.
Well, yeah, that's because the youngest students, you just ask them 2 oral questions. That's the whole review for them. 2 simple oral questions that are there in the book. You don't have to come up with them. But since it's all oral, there's nothing to write down.
Yeah. And if I could bring that home to so many moms that I talk to, just, it doesn't have to be complicated in these early years. It could just be so enjoyed. Read, discuss, have that narration or that telling back or the digesting of the ideas just by discussion, and do activities. Put your hands on, go for the hike, keep the bird feeder, do all the things. And it doesn't have to be a heavy burden on you or your children in these earlier ages. And it's only as we get older that we get slowly more formal in the way that we approach these. So I know that you're not a big advocate of formalized notebooks like these, but many moms that we talk to just say, I need something that puts it down day by day and a spot for this child to write in. And so when we have the older and oldest, and you gotta to note the difference because it doesn't look terribly different, but the content is different. There is a place for them to do that recording of what they've learned.
Yeah, one difference you will see between them is the lines ought to be thinner in the oldest, because we're expecting them to write more in the oldest.
This is about your 3rd and 4th grade student. Yep. Again, we don't put a specific grade to it, but moms and dads who want a grade would say that's about 3rd and 4th grade, and this one's about 5th and 6th grade. And you will see that those lines are tighter, and expecting a student who has higher level writing skills and the ability to put stuff in.
And so, once the student gets used to this, the student can do their own notebook without any guidance and just, free form it all. But if they need some guidance, that's the purpose of those.
Okay. So we haven't talked about your upper level stuff. You don't just have these 5 science in the series. Do I call it in the beginning series?
Actually, we call it science in history.
Science in history, the science and history series. Yeah. I've got piles of books all around me. But we have books available. You have books available for the older age. Do you want to tell me about some of these ones?
Yeah, so this would start, and that's the first one. This would start when the student's ready to get out of the elementary, and so this would be 7th or 8th grade, depending on the student. Usually, this does the 20th century, so you're learning the modern view of science, and it's what we call a hierarchical approach. So we start with atoms, and then build molecules, and then tissues, and then organs and organisms, all the way up to ecosystems. So this is your second general overview. Science in the beginning is a general overview for the very young. Science in the atomic age is now the general overview for the students who's now in middle school or junior high school or something like that.
And we do have a notebook for this one. It's actually called the workbook.
This is different now, because in these books, what you have are questions you have to answer. You have questions in the reading. They're called comprehension check questions. And then you have questions at the end, which is the chapter review. And all of what you're seeing printed there is in the book. All this is the question in the book with space for you to write your answers.
A vehicle for keeping it. And you know what, Dr. J, I really, for my kids at this age, I found it really helpful to have those notebooks because I was transitioning them to independent work. And I would be able to say, show me that page, and know that there wasn't a gazillion pages all over the house, because a child that is starting to learn to manage their own stuff doesn't necessarily pull it all together into the same little folder naturally. And so knowing that they had it there, and that they had question, answer, really helps to transition into that level of independence that our middle school and early high school students need, or at least my middle school and early high school students need, in order to transition into upper level learning. So I do appreciate that, and just having this format available for them.
And we have that for all of our junior high and high school books. Depending on how far you want to go, you can do that. So that's our 7th or 8th grade book. Then our 8th or 9th grade book is the Earth Science book. This is considered your first introduction to physical science. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to pull that back from up here. Earth Science is this one.
Yeah, and that could be a high school course. A lot of high schools have Earth Science in 9th grade, so it wouldn't look weird.
Here in Canada. Yeah.
Yeah. But a lot of homeschoolers take it in 8th grade because they're ready for it. But once again, now it's the same format as the previous book, only this time it's different content now. It is specifically fossils and rocks and the structure of the Earth, weather. There's also a little bit of astronomy in there as well. You learn about the solar system and the universe as a whole. And this is the first time you're actually doing math with science too. And that's one of the things that separates the physical sciences from the life sciences, at least in the introductory level, high school and early college. You don't do math in the life sciences so much, but you do an enormous amount in the physical sciences. And so that's where this starts, where the math starts.
So what would be my minimum math requirement for this?
So most students should at least be taking pre-algebra. They don't have to be finished with it, but they should at least be taking, because what we're doing in this book in terms of the math is multiplying fractions and things like that. So the student has to be completely done with arithmetic, so that all of that makes sense to them.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, and then we separate, and this is different from what most Canadian schools do. We separate the sciences into the 3 major categories, and we have the students study each category individually. So the next one is typically biology, because biology doesn't do any math. Ideally, the student should be at least taking algebra while they take biology. And that covers, of course, just the living world, cells and plants and biochemistry and things like that. And then we do the chemistry, and that requires you to have finished Algebra 1 because there's some serious algebra in chemistry. So
Algebra 1 being a typical 9th grade, and it's typical 9th grade of homeschool and American curriculums. It's not typical. We don't call it Algebra 1 in Canadian grade 9 curriculum. We mix together our algebra and geometry just to keep it lively.
Okay.
So we would want to get through that 9th grade or Algebra 1.
Right. They need to get through They need to be able to take an equation and rearrange it. You got 4 or 5 variables. You ought to be able to rearrange it to solve for any one of those variables. That's what you're really looking for in chemistry. And then physics is the last offering we have. And that's for students who have finished a good geometry course to the point where they know the 3 basic trig functions. So they need to know what sine, cosine, and tangent are, and how they're defined on a right triangle, and how to use the calculator to get them, and things like that, because that forms the basis of vector analysis, which is critical in physics.
Right. And again, if you're looking at if we're sort of getting that hybrid of American and Canadian curriculums, one thing that is typical of Canadian curriculums is that we do start trigonometry in 9th grade. With a little bit of algebra and a little geometry, we mix it all together. So a student doing a Canadian-based math curriculum can approach this probably after 9th grade.
Oh, good. Good to know.
And another thing that is typical of Canadian curriculums is that biology, chemistry, and physics are always approached at 11th grade. So we do that mix of earth science, physical science, general science in 9th and 10th grades. And then we say, you are going to be a science student. We're going to just pummel you with all of the biology and chemistry and physics in 1 year, because at 12th grade, we do an advanced level if we're doing university prep. So, and we do really like Berean Builders books for university prep level, knowing that in Canada, university and college are different. College is very much an applied learning environment, and university tends to be professional or academic learning. And when we have students that we know are capable of or are planning to go on to university level learning, then we would definitely recommend Berean Builders as one of those appropriate choices for university level prep.
And one thing to note about all of our books, from elementary all the way through physics, is in the introduction, there's a website you can go to ask me questions. So if you get stuck on anything, you can ask me questions. I even solve grading disputes. If the parent thinks it's wrong, but the child insists it's right, I'll tell you.
And how often have you been corrected when somebody said, "Oh, Dr. J, you actually had the wrong answer in something"?
Yeah, absolutely. That's happened. It's funny. I have a student solve every problem in the book. And so forth, and I've checked it as well, but we still get mistakes because
and that's what I tell families when I did a lot of tutoring of math and teaching of math before I had kids and when my kids were little. And one thing I know is that every single math book has mistakes in it. Every single one does. So when you catch it, you have gone to the next level. Good job on you. There are those mistakes that we will always catch. So that's good. And I enjoy watching your posts on Facebook when you point out some things that your students have shown you or responses to their assignments and stuff like that. So that's really fun to watch and to see as you share those things. So tell me, what makes Berean Builders just different from other science curriculums? I've got a lot of choices. There's a lot of good choices. There's a lot of choices that I like to help parents to steer around because they're not as solid or as robust. But what makes Berean Builders different from other science curriculums?
I think you have to split that up into elementary and then later because they are different. For elementary, the difference is that it's so kinesthetic. Apologia has a wonderful series that Jeannie Fulbright wrote. I'm not crazy about their earth science in elementary. It was written by someone other than Jeannie, and it's not very good in my opinion. But the Jeannie Fulbright stuff is amazing. Really good. But her activities, which are good, tend to focus on crafty things and long term. And that works fine for some students, but mine are every lesson and it's usually quick and easy. So that depends. I typically say, if you're the kind of student that just likes, or if you're the kind of family that likes to get on the couch, everybody on the couch and someone's reading aloud, Jeannie's the Apologia Elementary is the thing for you. If you're more, you really want to do experiments and things like that, then I think Berean Builders is a better choice. There are some other elementaries like Answers in Genesis is God's Design 4. I think they work better in the middle elementary years because they're a little advanced for young elementary and they're a little simple for late elementary. So I think they're more focused, but once again, in that range, they're pretty good as well. So I do think you have a lot of choices there. For the junior high and high school, even stuff that's marketed and supposedly written for homeschoolers, a lot of it is assuming there's a teacher present. Or at minimum that they're taking it from in a co-op where there's a parent who can at least pare down, or
that you have a teacher guide that is guiding a parent.
Yeah. So, and I don't think those work really well in the homeschool settings. So one of the things that set us apart is we're really designed for homeschoolers in that, as far as I know, we're the only upper level that has the conversational tone, the experiments you can do at home, and a free question answer service. I think we're the one science that does all of that. And I think if you're doing it at home, I don't see how you get how you can do it without all three of those.
That question and answer service is gold for many families. Especially,
and I love it because I love it.
Moms say, I don't have a degree in science, but I have a kid who's going to get a degree in science, and they need to be able to dig deeper. So that's really cool. That's really
cool. And it doesn't have to be related to the curriculum either. It needs to be related to the science. But if my chemistry book has spurred you on to learn something more about quantum chemistry, for example, I'm happy to answer those kinds of questions too, as long as I'm able. So I think that's a resource you really need. And like I said, I think Berean Builders is the only homeschool company that's doing that these days.
That's neat.
So, and
and to that end, getting hands-on. Sorry,
yeah.
let me finish
Well,
your thought.
I would say we're really the only ones where academics have been doing the writing. So, you know, been a university professor all my life, so I have a view from which I expect university students to know. The first author of my biology book, he's been a university professor of biology all of his life. So we bring to the table our experience at university to say, here's what a university-bound student needs to know, and we can skip the stuff they don't need to know. Because one thing you will see with a couple of especially biology books out there is it's just way too much for a high school student to know.
Yeah, very neat. Yeah, so true. We do, okay, now I'm going off onto that rabbit trail. We do, as Canadian students preparing for university, need to go into an upper level biology in order to get to be university ready. So I would do my discovering designs with biology text, and then in order to be university ready, what suggestions do you have to make that step and be prepared for university applications?
Well, I think Apology is Human Body book. I think they now call that Advanced Biology. I'm not sure. That's a good choice. I wrote the first and just the first edition. I co-wrote the first edition, and then my co-author co-wrote the second edition. So it's clean. It's a nice continuation, and so you know it really does fill in those things that you know. That aren't covered in Discovering Design with biology that are part of what you guys would call grade 12 biology or biology 30 in some of the provinces.
Yes, biology 30.
Yeah. So I think that's a good choice. Also, you know, I've always been a fan of doing one or two classes using someone else as your grading person, as your supervisor. So, you know, online enrollment, there's a lot of really good, because if you've taken Discovering Design with biology, you can take an online high school AP biology program, which is
that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, that's more
that
than your.
Many students are going, and APs weren't as available in Canada until a few years ago. Now they're much more available. So I could go from my Discovering Design biology to an AP biology, and then AP meaning I get advanced placement. I'm finishing up what would be typically a high school level 30 or grade 12 biology.
It's actually a little more than that.
Reaching into that college or university level learning.
Yeah, so AP is really university level, and of course you don't get a university credit unless you take the test. But you can, and a lot of Canadian universities actually want homeschool applicants to take an AP test or two. That's one way they can skip provincial tests in certain places.
Yeah.
So that's always a great option. So this prepares you. You wouldn't, for most, now there are some superstar students out there, no question, but for most high school students, you can't take an AP course in 1 year and learn. It's just overwhelming. So, and that's why you take regular biology in high school. So when you go to university, you're ready for university biology. In the same way, take regular high school biology, and then you're ready for an AP biology. So the only effective AP programs I've known are 2 years, one for the basic and then the second for the AP.
Oh, okay. Okay. Very good. Very good. I'm trying to think, is there, I know, I was going to talk about some of these peripheral resources that you have, that being that you do have audiobooks specifically available for these books, and we are able to provide the ones on a thumb drive for your upper level books, that you also have audiobooks, but they're streaming ones, meaning that we don't have them at the Learning House, but they are available for those families who want to have or feel that audiobooks would be beneficial for their young students, whether they have learning differences or whether that just suits their family learning style.
Yeah, it does. Certainly, unlike a novel, it doesn't replace the book. But for a student who's an audio learner or has difficulty reading, that can be a really good choice. And as far as, you know, usually you think about an audio book as more expensive than the book, but that's not the case here. You know, the audiobooks are about, well, I'm talking US dollars, but they're about a third the cost of the book itself.
They're quite economical. We found. Yeah, and just helpful for those families that want something different. Also, we do have available, and like we work with third-party companies like Home Science Tools, like Nature's Workshop. I can't lift that one up; it's a little bit heavier. That make kits for your various books. Can you tell me the value of these and why I would get a lab kit?
Well, in some cases, they're necessary. So for biology, chemistry, and earth science, in order to do the experiments, you need the kit, because these are things, some of those experiments use things you just don't have at home. Specifically, your earth science, you've got specific minerals, rocks, and fossils you need, and they're all in the kit. In chemistry, certain chemicals and glassware and so forth. In biology, microscope and dead animals and all that stuff.
Dead animals.
So those are absolutely necessary. Now, there are convenience kits for all the others, physics as well as the elementary. And those convenience kits they're mostly, it's all household stuff, but it's, all collected in one place in one box. And if you're a family that doesn't use styrofoam, for example, what you need that styrofoam is in the kit. Berean Builders doesn't sell that. Berean Builders only sells the necessary kits, but these third parties and you and so forth do. And so it's just a question of, how much disposable income do you have? Is it worth it for you to buy the kit in order to have all that stuff already?
Yeah.
Pretty much everything except water and paper.
and that's it. Like, I know at various times in our homeschooling life, because we're still homeschooling now, been homeschooling for more than 20 years. There was times when I was like, if we have it, we'll do it. If I don't have it, I'll run to the grocery store and get that tin plate or that little bottle of iodine. But I don't have the money to buy a kit right now. There's other times in my life when I think, when I go to the store, I'm going to get 6 tin plates and I only need one, and I'm never going to use all the other 5. And it's not only convenient, but it saves me a ton of time and buying stuff that I wouldn't have to buy otherwise. So one thing that we do like to help our families know is that there is great value in both the Home Science Tools kit and the Nature's Workshop kit, if that serves the needs of your family, but they're not required for most courses. And that the difference between these two, there are a significant difference in price point because they have different goals. Nature's Workshop aims to provide you with all of the needed resources, whereas Home Science Tools aims to fill that gap between what you probably have at home and what you probably have to run out to get. And so they will give you the necessities, and that makes it a lower price point. And so just depends. Do you want it open and go? We're just going to get it done. I don't have to run around. Get your Nature's Workshop kit. If you want, hey, let's just fill in the gaps so that I can get the stuff that I wouldn't have around the house, get a Home Science Tools kit. If you're like, we're going to do most of these activities, we won't do them all. It's okay with me if I miss some. I'll grab stuff from around the house or keep a running list with my grocery list each week. Then you don't need either of these kits for most of the courses. Is that an appropriate summary? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Dr. J, I've kept you for a long time. And I'm really enjoying this chat. Thanks for taking the time today. Can I ask you before we go, just tell me a little bit about your family homeschooling experience. I've heard this story a little bit before, but would you tell us about your homeschool journey?
Well, I got interested in home education before we had kids. My wife and I were both career oriented, but I was teaching at the time at Ball State University, which is in Muncie, Indiana. And I started encountering homeschool graduates, and I didn't know they were homeschool graduates till they told me. And even when they told me, I didn't really know what that meant because I didn't know what homeschooling was, but they were my best students. And, if I consider probably my top 5 students I've ever had throughout, top 5 university students I've ever had throughout my career, all 5 of them were home educated. So that impressed me. And so I started working with homeschoolers and actually writing curriculum, having never done any homeschooling myself, which is kind of the picture of what a university professor is.
Yeah.
I mean, we teach things we've never done.
Yeah. You're inventing what wasn't there, finding out the answers to questions you didn't know we had.
Yeah.
We didn't
So
know we had. Yeah.
and that happened for a couple of years, and then my wife and I, a situation developed in our church, and we ended up adopting a teen, and she had been going to public school her whole life. We were initially her temporary guardian, so we couldn't change her education yet, but once we adopted her, we then started home educating her, homeschooling her, and that's when I learned a lot more about what homeschooling is. And when I give talks at homeschooling conventions, some of my favorite are the ones about what I learned homeschooling her, both what I learned academically that I'd never learned before, but also what I learned about homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went until she graduated. Then she went off to university, and now she and her husband run a specialty shipping firm. I came into homeschooling first because I saw the products and didn't know anything about it, and then stayed with it, especially after homeschooling my daughter. And what's interesting about my daughter is she's a very social person. The entire homeschool experience, she didn't want to be homeschooled. She wanted to be adopted, and that was the package deal, and she took the package deal. But she did not want to be homeschooled the whole way through. But when she got to university, after about 6 weeks, she called us and thanked us for homeschooling her, because she saw how deficient her peers were on basic stuff. And she recognized all of this was the stuff she learned in homeschooling. And it wasn't facts, it was how to think, how to find information. Those were the kind of things she learned in homeschool that her fellow students were just woefully deficient at. Yeah. And it's no better now. I mean, it's surprising, we've got these things here that basically you can access pretty much the sum total knowledge of human existence. And most students still don't know how to find out real information.
Right. Right. Very neat. I very much appreciate hearing that story whenever I've heard it. And we've crossed paths at many conferences, and more often than not, you've taught me at conferences, and really appreciate the knowledge and the enthusiasm that you bring to homeschooling, to critical thinking, to history, and especially to science, and that you package this all up in these neat resources for families. Thanks for doing that, and thanks for spending the time. I don't know what else to say. You've really impacted our family over the years with your curriculums, and we really appreciate that, and we appreciate the opportunity to share that with other families, Doctor.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.